My name is Margaret, and there are mornings when my body reminds me of my age before my mind does. It happens in small ways: the stiffness in my fingers when I wake up, the extra seconds it takes to button a cardigan, the slight tremble in my hands when I try to hold something delicate. These are not dramatic changes, but they are constant. They whisper the same message again and again. Time is moving forward. For a long time, I pretended those whispers didn't affect me. I smiled through them. I adjusted quietly. I told myself it was normal, that everyone ages, that I should simply accept it. And I did accept it, at least on the surface. But inside my heart, I carried a private fear. What happens when my hands can no longer do what they used to? I never said that fear out loud. I didn't want my children to worry. I didn't want to sound weak, and I certainly didn't want to become the kind of elderly woman people look at with pity. So I did what I have always done when life felt uncertain. I stayed quiet. That morning began like most mornings do. Soft light through the curtains, the familiar sound of the kettle heating, the comforting smell of tea. I sat near my window, my favorite place in the home, and wrapped both hands around my mug. And that's when I noticed it again. The tremble. It was slight, but it was there, a tiny shaking in my fingers that made the tea ripple gently against the rim. I held the mug tighter, as if strength could erase the truth. But the more I focused on it, the more visible it became. Not because it grew worse, but because I couldn't ignore it anymore. I stared at my hands. The skin was thinner than it once was. The veins showed like blue rivers beneath the surface. The knuckles were more pronounced, the fingers less smooth. These hands had worked hard for decades. They had carried babies, lifted grocery bags, scrubbed floors, held pens, stitched buttons, wiped tears. They had been steady through storms. They had been useful, reliable. And now they trembled. I felt my chest tighten, and a sudden wave of sadness rose inside me. It wasn't just about shaking hands. It was about what shaking hands represented. It was proof that my body was beginning to change in ways I couldn't control. It was proof that I was not moving toward youth, but away from it. And no matter how mature you are, no matter how much wisdom you gain, there is still something inside you that mourns the loss of strength. I set the mug down carefully, afraid I might spill it if I wasn't fully focused. Then I pressed my palms against my thighs and took a slow breath. "It's all right," I whispered to myself. "It's just age." But my voice didn't sound convincing. After breakfast, I decided to sew a loose button on my cardigan. It was a simple task, something I had done thousands of times in my life. I found my sewing kit, sat at the kitchen table, and held the needle between my fingers. The thread was thin and pale, and the needle's eye was small. I brought it close, squinting slightly. My fingers trembled again. The thread missed the opening. Once, twice, 3 times. A sharp frustration rose in me, quick and surprising. It felt almost childish. I wanted to blame the light. I wanted to blame the needle. But deep down, I knew what I was truly angry at. I was angry at the loss. I was angry at the fact that something so simple now required patience. On the 4th try, the thread slipped through. I should have felt proud, but instead I felt tired. I sat there holding the needle and stared at the button like it was an enemy. Then I laughed softly because I realized how ridiculous it was. This was my life now, fighting with buttons. But the laughter didn't fully reach my eyes. Later, as I washed dishes, the trembling returned. A glass clinked against the sink, and my heart jumped. I imagined it falling, shattering, making a mess I might struggle to clean. I imagined myself losing grip more often, dropping things, needing help for tasks that once felt natural. And then the fear finally formed into words inside my mind. What if I become helpless? I dried my hands and leaned against the counter, swallowing the emotion in my throat. Helplessness is one of the greatest fears of aging, not because you don't want support, but because you don't want to lose your dignity. You don't want to feel like your life belongs to other people's schedules. You don't want your independence to disappear piece by piece until you no longer recognize yourself. That afternoon, my grandson stopped by unexpectedly. He had grown taller than I sometimes remember, his voice deeper, his movements fast and confident. He carried a bag of groceries and smiled warmly. "Hi, Grandma," he said softly. "I brought you a few things." My heart warmed at the sight of him. I loved him deeply, but I also felt embarrassed because part of me wondered if he had noticed my tremble. Part of me wondered if he could see the truth I was trying to hide. "Thank you," I said gently. He began placing groceries on the counter, and I reached to help. I lifted a jar, nothing heavy, and my fingers trembled slightly. The jar tilted. I caught it quickly, but not fast enough to hide the moment. My grandson paused. He didn't stare. He didn't react dramatically. He simply stepped closer and took the jar from my hands casually as if it were nothing. He said softly, "I've got it." And that simple kindness made my eyes sting, because he didn't make me feel weak. He made me feel cared for. And he made me feel cared for in a way that didn't steal my dignity. That is a rare kind of kindness. Most people, even when they mean well, rush in too quickly when they see an elderly person struggling. They grab things out of your hands. They speak louder than necessary. They say, "No, no, let me," in a tone that quietly suggests you are no longer capable. But my grandson didn't do that. He simply helped as if it were normal, as if I had not lost anything at all. And because he treated it as normal, my shame began to loosen. I watched him place the jar on the counter and continue unpacking groceries. His movements were quick and confident. He didn't even glance back at me because he wasn't making a point. He wasn't announcing my weakness. He was just being present. I sat down at the kitchen table and let myself breathe. My grandson turned and noticed my expression. He walked over, pulled out the chair across from me, and sat down. He didn't pick up his phone. He didn't seem in a rush. He looked at me the way young people look at someone they truly love, with curiosity and softness. "Grandma," he said quietly, "are you okay?" That question was gentle, but it went straight through my defenses. For a moment, I wanted to say yes. I wanted to give him the easy answer. But something about his calm presence made it feel safe to tell the truth. I nodded slowly. "I'm okay," I said, "but my hands have been shaking more lately." He didn't look scared. He didn't look uncomfortable. He simply nodded as if I had told him the weather forecast. "That happens," he said softly. "My teacher said it's normal for some people when they get older." I smiled faintly. "Is that what your teacher talks about in class?" I asked. He shrugged, half smiling. "We were learning about health," he said, "and about how bodies change." Then he leaned forward and said something that surprised me. "I don't think it makes you less you." I stared at him, because that was exactly what I had been afraid of. I had been afraid that my trembling hands meant I was becoming someone else, someone weaker, someone smaller, someone fading away. But my grandson, with all his youth and certainty, spoke the truth I needed most. I am not less myself. I am simply older. He reached for my hand gently, not in a dramatic way, not in a pitying way, just a natural touch. And as his warm young hand wrapped around my wrinkled fingers, the trembling softened slightly, not because he cured it, but because comfort calms the nervous system, kindness calms the body. I whispered, "I hate it sometimes." He looked at me with understanding. "I get it," he said. "But your hands did a lot. They still do." That sentence made my throat tighten. He continued, "You cooked for us. You held me when I was small. You wrote cards for my birthdays. You fixed buttons. You made home feel safe." I blinked quickly, because he was right. My hands weren't just hands, they were proof of care, proof of love in action. The tremble didn't erase what they had done. He squeezed lightly and added, "And even if they shake, you're still my grandma. You're still the strongest person I know." Strongest. It's funny how life changes what strength looks like. When I was younger, strength meant lifting heavy things and working long hours. It meant pushing through exhaustion without stopping. It meant never letting anyone see you cry. But sitting there with trembling hands, I realized there is another kind of strength. The strength of acceptance. The strength of continuing. The strength of letting yourself be helped without losing your self-respect. My grandson stayed for a while longer, telling me small stories about school, about friends, about a teacher he didn't like. He made me laugh, and laughter, even quiet laughter, loosened something tight inside me. I found myself smiling more easily than I had all day. After he left, the house became quiet again, but this time the quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt gentle, like a pause rather than an emptiness. I walked into the living room and sat in my chair by the window. The light outside was softer now, turning warm as afternoon leaned into evening. I placed my hands on my lap and watched them. Yes, they trembled, but I noticed something else too. They still responded when I chose calm. They still held my mug. They still moved with intention. They still carried tenderness. They still reached for life. And then I thought about my heart. My heart had never stopped being steady. Even when my body struggled, my heart still knew how to love. It still cared. It still wanted to give warmth. It still softened for children. It still forgave. It still believed in kindness. I realized then that aging does not steal your soul. It only changes the way you move through the world. The tremble in my hands was not a sign that I was ending. It was a sign that I was still here, still living inside a body that had traveled a long road. That night I attempted to thread the needle again to finish my cardigan button. My fingers still trembled, the thread still slipped a few times, but I didn't curse myself. I didn't tighten with frustration. I breathed slowly and tried again, calmly, the way my grandson had looked at me, without judgment. And after several tries, the thread finally passed through. I smiled to myself, not because the task was impressive, but because my reaction was different. I wasn't angry at my body. I was gentle with it. That is what maturity gives you if you let it. It gives you the ability to stop fighting yourself, to stop punishing yourself for being human, to stop measuring worth by perfection. I finished sewing the button and held the cardigan up. It wasn't perfect. The stitches weren't as neat as they once were, but they were real. They were mine, and that felt meaningful. I placed the cardigan over my shoulders and walked back to my window. The evening light touched my silver hair softly. I watched the sky deepen in color and felt a peaceful truth settle inside me. My hands aren't as steady anymore, but my heart still is, and maybe that is what truly matters. And maybe that is what truly matters, I thought, because life has a way of stripping away the things you once depended on and leaving you with what is most real. When you are young, you often believe your value is in what you can do, how fast you move, how much you can carry, how many tasks you can finish in a day. You don't question it. You simply live that way because the world rewards productivity. The world praises the busy, the strong, the tireless. But as I grew older, I began to understand another truth. A person's worth is not measured by steady hands. It is measured by a steady heart. That evening, after I finished sewing my cardigan, I stayed by the window for a long time. The sky slowly shifted from light blue to warm orange, and the streets below quieted as people returned home. I watched the world move and felt my own thoughts moving too, deeper, slower, clearer. I remembered my mother's hands. She was not a soft woman. She was hard-working, practical, and sometimes stern. Her hands were rough from work, from cooking, cleaning, carrying, surviving. I remember watching her knead dough with strong fingers, her sleeves rolled up, her face focused. When she was angry, she would press her lips together and keep working, as if work could hold back emotion. But I also remember the tenderness in those hands, the way they wiped my tears when I was small, the way they brushed hair from my forehead when I was sick, the way they rested on my shoulder when she didn't know what to say but wanted to offer comfort anyway. Her hands weren't perfect, but her love was real. And suddenly, I realized the same thing about myself. My hands had changed, yes. They trembled, they tired faster, they weren't as reliable as they used to be. But the love inside them had not disappeared. The intention inside them was still there. The instinct to care, to comfort, to nurture. It hadn't aged. It had deepened. The next day, I woke up and decided to bake something simple. Not because anyone asked me to, not because I needed to prove I could still do it, but because I wanted to create warmth in my own home, the way I always had. I chose a recipe I knew well, one that didn't require complicated steps. I moved slowly, carefully, allowing myself the extra time. I measured flour with patience. I cracked eggs carefully, holding them close to the bowl so my fingers wouldn't slip. When my hands trembled, I paused. I breathed. I steadied myself. It took longer than it would have years ago, but the smell that filled the kitchen when it baked was the same. Warm, sweet, comforting. That smell carried memory. It carried belonging. It carried the soft message, life is still here. When the baking was done, I sat at the table with a small slice and tea. I took a bite and closed my eyes. It tasted like my own effort, my own patience, my own care. It tasted like dignity. Then my phone rang. It was my daughter. "Mom, how are you feeling today?" In the past, I might have answered quickly, trying not to sound like a worry, but something in me was shifting. "I'm okay. My hands are a little shaky, but I'm okay." There was a pause, and then she said softly, "Do you want me to come by?" The offer was loving, but I didn't want to turn it into fear. "No," I said gently. "I'm safe. I'm being careful. I just want you to know it's part of aging." Her voice softened. "I hate imagining you struggling." "I'm not struggling," I said quietly. "I'm adjusting. There's a difference." She didn't respond right away, and I could tell she was thinking. Then she said something that made me smile. "You know, you've always been like this. Even when things were hard, you adjusted." Yes, I thought. That's what steady hearts do. After the call, I looked at my hands again and realized something I hadn't fully understood before. Trembling hands are not a sign of failure. They are a sign of time. And time is not the enemy. Time is the witness to a life lived. If a person has reached 72, it means they have made it through storms, through fear, through joys, through losses, through ordinary days that required quiet courage. A body that ages is not a broken body. It is a loyal body. It carries you until it can't carry you the same way. Then it asks you to move differently, to slow down, to soften, to be gentle. And perhaps that is why aging can be beautiful even when it hurts, because it teaches you what matters. It teaches you to stop chasing perfection. It teaches you to stop rushing. It teaches you to treasure small things, a warm mug, a finished button, a homemade slice of cake, a grandchild's hug. It teaches you to accept help without shame. It teaches you to speak to yourself kindly. A few days later, my grandson came again. He walked into the kitchen and saw the baked goods on the counter. His eyes lit up like he was 5 years old. "Grandma, you baked?" I smiled. "Yes," I said, "with my shaky hands." He walked over, picked up a piece, and took a bite. Then he smiled with satisfaction. "Still the best," he said. Still the best. That sentence was simple, but it felt like a blessing, because he didn't love me for my steadiness. He loved me for my presence, for my heart. As the evening came again, I returned to my chair by the window, the familiar place where my thoughts like to settle. The warm light touched my silver hair and the gentle wrinkles of my face, and I sat quietly, hands resting in my lap. Yes, they trembled, but they were peaceful. They were no longer fighting themselves, and my heart, as always, remained steady. Steady in love, steady in patience, steady in the quiet strength of continuing. If you are listening to my story right now, I want you to remember this. Your worth is not tied to your body's perfection. Your worth is not in how quickly you can move or how flawlessly you can do things. Your worth is in your heart, in your kindness, in your patience, in your love. Bodies change, hands shake, but love can stay steady. That night, I watched the last bit of sunlight fade beyond the buildings, and I let a gentle smile appear on my face, because even in an aging body, my heart was still alive, and it still knew exactly how to love.